Hello and welcome back to On the Workbench. Today we are taking a look at Ridgid power tools and more specifically the Ridgid power tools that you cannot buy in America. But let's take a little detour first and talk a little bit on the background on Ridgid because that's going to be important for how we figure out the tools that we cannot buy in America. So first of all, Ridgid is a brand owned by Emerson. Emerson is a company based out of St. Louis, Missouri, and they have a whole host of solutions. I think of them as someone who grew up in St. Louis as Emerson Electric, but they are far more than electric. They are involved in a whole host of other commercial activities, engineering services, and the like. And so one of their brands is Ridgid. So if you look at Ridgid, Ridgid really splits up into two different parts of a company. There's what I might refer to as Ridgid Red, which is their plumbing tools, and that's one of the big parts of Ridgid as a commercial plumbing company. But there's also Ridgid Orange, which is what you can find at the Home Depot in the US, and is probably what you think of first when you think of Ridgid. Their orange shop vacs and the like. So since Ridgid is such a diverse company with a little bit of a different ownership group, they actually outsource Ridgid Orange to be manufactured by a company called TTI, or Tektronix Industries. They're a Chinese-based company. And these are the other brands that TTI makes. You got Milwaukee, Ryobi, Homelite, Hoover Vacuums, Hart. You find those at Walmart now. Stiletto, Auric, Dirt Devil. Obviously a lot of vacuums in here, which I think is interesting. Empire Level. But then right here, right next to Milwaukee, is a company called AEG. That was a German tool company. And so that company, AEG, is a line of tools that TTI was not selling in the US when Emerson set up the agreement with TTI, and TTI said, hey, we've got this whole platform we can use. And so the AEG platform that's in use in other places around the world has been borrowed to be used as part of the Ridgid lineup, and essentially it's badge engineering at its finest. And to be fair, this goes both ways. There are some Ridgid tools that you can't get in AEG, and some AEG tools you cannot get in Ridgid. They're interchangeable. And so today we're going to be looking at AEG tools. And part of this is because Ridgid in the US just came out with this new line of subcompact tools when people were expecting outdoor power equipment, perhaps a bandsaw, or some other form of tool that they did not announce. To the disappointment of many. It seems like so far what I've seen about these tools, there's nothing to knock about them. They seem like good tools, and I think they definitely serve a purpose. In my opinion, a lot of these look like slightly redesigned or modified versions of Milwaukee M12 tools. You know, the impact wrench is a borrow of the M12 stubby. The cutoff tool is a borrow of the M12 fuel cutoff tool. And so I think that's the genesis on this to some extent. Obviously, the voltage is different, and the handle design is different. But I think, and I could be wrong, that's just my guess on the genesis behind that. So, with a disappointment here, let's take a look at the AEG tools, the Ridgid tools, if you will, that you cannot buy in America. So a couple ground rules as we get started here. When I think about tools you can't get in America, I'm not going to include in this list tools that were once available in America and were discontinued. So for example, Ridgid's Gen 2 or Gen 3 line of tools is still actually available elsewhere around the world. I think it provides a lower cost point for some locations, but that's been withdrawn from the US market and superseded by newer tools, the Gen 5 and the other tools that are newer. And secondly, I'm not going to include all the other variations of whether it comes with a battery and a charger, or it comes as a bare tool, or in some markets as a bare tool is known as a quote-unquote skin. So we're going to throw those aside and we're going to focus on the tool. Forget about the other accessories that go with it. Just focus on the tool. And so the first one we're going to start out with here, since the big question was about outdoor power equipment, is a brushless line trimmer, essentially a weed eater, if you will. And yep, Ridgid has that, or AEG. And so 18 volts will get you that. This is in Australian dollars if you're looking at this on the screen. Obviously, your mileage may vary on what the conversion factor will be day by day, but yep, they've got one of those. Of course, there's a hedge trimmer as well. Yes, and this hedge trimmer is brushless. A chainsaw. Milwaukee's got a chainsaw. The Ridgid one's a little different, or the AEG, if you will. And another piece of outdoor power equipment that I think is interesting is the backpack sprayer. To me, when I look at this reminds me a lot of the Milwaukee switch tank system, but a little different. And I want to call your attention up in the corner to where it says 58 volts. That, from what I can tell, their 58 volt system is almost identical to the Echo system in the US. I could be wrong. Just a guess. I'm going to hesitate there because there's a whole line of dedicated outdoor power equipment at 58 volts. And this backpack sprayer can go to 18 or 58 volts, which I find to be very fascinating. Moving on, the next tool in the outdoor power equipment is a brushless lawnmower. Now, this says skin here on the screen. A skin simply means it does not include batteries and a charger. Just a difference in nomenclature and verbiage, not a big deal. And so this, if you look carefully, they're 2 times 18, so it's a 36 volt tool. Fascinating. I love the idea of them being able to take 2 batteries, put it together, and get the higher voltage. We've seen DeWalt do that on their lawnmower. And so, obviously, one of the big things is if you're invested in the Ridgid or the AEG battery platform, you want to use those batteries. You don't want to jump to another platform for another tool. And so, do they have a lawnmower? The answer is yes, they do. And this is listed as an 18-inch lawnmower. A little bit smaller than maybe what you might hope. I mean, considering a typical lawnmower in the U.S. is about 20, 21, 22 inches, give or take. So a little bit smaller to make up for the lower voltage. If you want a larger lawnmower, you're going to need a higher voltage tool. I think that's been pretty well established at this point. Next up, sticking with the same theme of dual battery, we've got a brushless 230 millimeter. So this is about a 9-inch angle grinder that uses dual batteries. So basically 18 volts. Doubled gets you 36. And so I think this is interesting. And you can also use this one, if I'm not mistaken, with just one battery. There are some of these, quick spoiler alert, there's a few other dual battery tools. And some of the dual battery ones actually will work with only one, but then you get a boost when you put the second tool and double it to 36 volts. Next up is a slightly smaller angle grinder at 180 millimeters. Again, dual battery. And then we have a dual battery, 18 volt wet dry dust extractor. So with this, there's obviously a filter here. We've got some accessories that come with it. Lift it up, and there's a spot for the 2 batteries. And then a switch, so we got a couple speeds here. And there's the exhaust on the back. No muffler provided with that for the exhaust. So fascinating by this. And also, just if you look at this in Australian dollars, the price point is definitely smaller than some of the other tools in the 18 volt or really 36 volt lineup than what I would have expected to have been. So kudos to them. Next up, now this one is the one that's going to attract probably a fair bit of attention. This is a 10-inch, 254 millimeter brushless sliding dual compound miter saw. Oh boy, I think this would sell wonderful in the US, but obviously I think TTI knows that Milwaukee's got a cordless miter saw and trying to figure out how they can manage to corner the market without stealing market share from themselves is the reason why I don't think this is in the US, but I think this would definitely be popular. The dual battery system here at its finest at a full 10 inches. There was the 7¼ inch miter saw released in the US that I believe has been withdrawn and is no longer being sold. Next up, we have a blower or inflator, workshop blower, if you will. You can see where you can put the little nozzle on the side if you need to deflate an air mattress, put on the end to inflate an air mattress or a pool toy, lake toy, or whatever else you've got. So all sorts of options there. Next up on the list is a fusion jet blower. Again, the word skin simply means a bare tool with no batteries. So this is just a higher velocity tool here. If we take a few of the different looks at this, it's got an axial design, a lock-on trigger. I love the fact that the intake is not from the side, so it won't get stuck on your pant leg if you turn it the wrong way. To me, one of the more fun uses for a blower like this is trying to help start a campfire. Next up on the list is what they're advertising as a mid-torque impact wrench at a 1/2-inch anvil. Now this one, looking at the torque specs and converting them to English, comes in below what the torque spec is for the brushless impact wrench from Ridgid. So I'm not sure exactly where this fits on the market. And curiously enough, one of the tools that AEG does not have is a 3/8 impact wrench, which Ridgid does have available in the US. Again, I can't explain why. I can just merely try to show you what's out there around the globe. Next up, so we're looking at batteries, dual battery charger here. Pretty much par for the course. Especially with these dual battery systems, a little bit different than what the dual battery charger looks like in the US. Here's another option where there's a modified outlet here. This is for the Australian plug, so you can get this with a variant with extra plugs in the front or not. Not too much difference there. There's also a job site lantern. This obviously should remind you a lot of the Milwaukee. I think they call it the True View lantern. Rotate it between 360-degree illumination and 180-degree illumination. A caulk gun. This one interests me quite a bit personally. I find this to be an important tool and something that's probably going to be one of my next tools that I buy. I don't know what brand it's going to be, but I've gotten pretty much tired of using the old squeeze-type caulk gun that my arms just can't take it if I use that for too long, and something like this would be really nice to be able to have in my toolbox. Right now, Milwaukee has that in M18 and M12. So moving on in the 18-volt lineup, a Bluetooth portable speaker. Then we've got a couple of these AM/FM job site radios. To me, this one looks a lot like some of the job site radios that Makita puts out. And then here's a little simple one. Now, this one is an 18-volt or 12-volt job site radio. Pretty compact, so that's pretty nice that it does dual battery options. I wish there were more pictures to show you the backside, but there's not. So sticking with 12-volt now that we made the transition there, we've got the 12-volt rotary hammer. In the US, and the 12-volt lineup is really paltry. It's basically a drill, an impact, and a flashlight, and a multi-head oscillating multi-tool with other attachments. But this 12-volt lineup for Ridgid or AEG supports a far greater lineup of tools, including this rotary hammer, a hammer drill, a heated jacket. I would highly suspect that this borrows a lot of technology from Milwaukee. A drywall screw gun. Fascinating here. It looks like a really nice compact size. I'm not sure how well it would perform or how balanced that looks like that would be in the hand or not. It just looks unbalanced to me. That's just my first opinion looking at this. I haven't held it in my hand. And now if you're thinking about that 12-volt lineup, and maybe you got those 18-volt tools as well, well, guess what? They have a twin fast charger to be able to handle both of those, just like the regular Milwaukee charger can do both the M18 and M12. And so, yes, that is available in the orange livery under AEG, fully compatible with Ridgid. Now, sticking one more tool here is basically a one-handed recip saw. Maybe you call this a pruning saw. Some of the pictures they have go with this here simply show it as basically a compact recip saw. To me, that looks like that'd be pretty nice. It's got a nice keyless chuck here. It'd be nice if that shoe were a little bit nicer and adjustable. Saw this earlier in the 12-volt, but there is an 18-volt brushless drywall screwdriver. And this does support an attachment for a set of collated screws. Another curious 18-volt tool. We've now switched over to Europe from Australia. Look at this one with the offset head. That's kind of interesting. Makes me think of that Milwaukee installation tool. Now we've got a hammer drill, and this one's got a pretty large extended handle that I don't think we've seen on any of the North American Ridgid tools. And now here we go, another variant of the installer tool from Milwaukee, but in Ridgid with a right angle attachment. There's a few other attachments you can get for this same tool here. And then they also have a dedicated multi-tool. Interesting, the changeable head system is somewhat in limited use overseas compared to what it is in the US. And so I guess as a result, they've got the dedicated version. I mean, in my opinion, I'd make this a pass. I'd rather have the system we've got here in North America than this. Now, shifting gears to the 12-volt lineup, or really back to the 12-volt lineup, one other peculiarity caught my attention was a slightly different style of 12-volt battery. So here you can see there's a slide style 12 volt Ridgid battery floating around. And I think about the other lines of tools from TTI, Milwaukee's 12 volt line is not like this. Hart does not yet have a 12 volt line. Ridgid does not have a slide style battery pack like this. But it's interesting to see this style battery from TTI under the AEG or the Ridgid branding. This would definitely not be compatible with your 18 volt Ridgid tools, but I'm throwing this in here because I think this is interesting. Not sure what this means for the future of the Ridgid 12 volt lineup. I speculate that this is something they're flirting with, but it's not going anywhere, that this isn't a brushless tool. It's not a higher end tool like what you've seen with some of the other 12 volt tools. And so this same slide style battery is also available in a compact hammer drill and a compact impact driver. So I don't know if this is supposed to be an analog to what they've brought out in the States here under the Ridgid brand, but they're trying it with a slide style battery or something they're just flirting with. Something that's just interesting. It's good food for thought to see what the future of the Ridgid line in the US holds, given that this is floating around out there. I'm not someone that can see into the future to know what's going to happen, but I feel like especially in the US, the 12 volt line has been, I don't know, it's something that's not really worthwhile investing in my opinion, and that's one of the things I think that hurts the Ridgid line, is the lack of the 12 volt tools, whereas Milwaukee has a pretty good lineup where you can intermix between 18 and 12 volts and then use the same charger, which I think is genius. And even some tools, such as, if I can call it a tool, the heated jacket, is compatible with either 18 or 12 volts. And so I think that's fascinating. And so with that, that's our look at a number of tools that are Ridgid battery compatible, well, except for these last slide style 12 volt batteries, that you cannot get in North America as a Ridgid tool yet. I think I need to add that caveat in there to be fair. Maybe they'll be coming soon. Maybe they won't. I don't know what the future holds for these tools, but I think it's interesting. So if you happen to find yourself overseas or have a friend overseas that could ship you one of these and you're into the Ridgid lineup, these are some other options you might want to consider, or to look at some other international options through other international retail partners that might be able to deliver some of these tools to you under the AEG name for use in North America with your Ridgid batteries. Obviously, it won't have that lifetime service agreement that you normally get with Ridgid, because there's no way that Ridgid is going to accept these. Part of me would think it'd be interesting to be able to try putting the serial numbers from one of these into the Ridgid lifetime service agreement system, but I'm about 99% sure they would get rejected. But I think it'd be fascinating at least to try to see what happens. That would be interesting. I'm not going to do that in this video. We're just talking about the possibilities out there. So if you have any experience mixing Ridgid with AEG tools in their batteries, put in the comments below. I think a lot of other people would find that interesting. If you find anything else that's interesting or useful in this video, again, put in the comments below. If you haven't done so, please click the like button and subscribe, and check back here often for new videos. Thanks for watching this, and I appreciate it, and have a great day. Stay safe. Bye.